Welcome back to BeerFormers. So glad you guys stopping by to watch us again for episode 38. And for this episode, we are going to be going all the way back to the beginning.
Genesis?
Yes, Genesis. In the beginning, Primus created the 13, which we talked about last episode.
All right.
And then the Prime, and then
as well.
No, 1984, the year the first Transformers came out. The Decepticons that year were few in number. And it was always explained in the early days of the comic books, particularly, that it didn't matter that they were vastly outnumbered because they were war machines. And the Autobots were kind of like adapting to war, but the Decepticons were built for war. So there were like only 15 characters in the first year of this of the Transformers for the Decepticons. Oddly enough, of those like 15 characters, there are only 6 molds. Okay, they reuse the mold a lot for different characters.
So they just do different colors.
They paint them in different colors, things like that. Which brings me to the classic version of that, because we're going to talk about this as we get into it. We're going to be talking about what's known colloquially nowadays as the Seekers. The Seekers are the Decepticon Jets.
Okay, that's also a Dolly Parton song.
Is it the Seekers?
I am the Seeker.
And then they had the John Wayne film called The Searchers, but that's different. But so the Seekers. So the Seekers were all the Decepticons that turned into jets. Most of them turned into a variation of the F-15. In recent years, that's changed because the F-15 is out of production. But anyway, so the first 3 that we're going to talk about tonight are the classic 3. We're going to be talking about Thundercracker,
okay,
Skywarp,
okay,
and that lovable rascal who's always trying to do
Starscream.
power, Starscream.
I knew that one.
So we're just going to get all 3 of them out here. They are the exact same toy.
You broke it this time.
Just molded in different colors with slightly different stickers. All right. So first up was Thundercracker, then Skywarp, and then lastly we got good old Starscream here. So I remember seeing someone gave me like the catalog that came with their Transformer. Like, I don't know what Transformer the kid even bought, but they had the catalog in there. So you had like, I can't remember the exact number. It was like 30 something Autobots and only 15 Decepticons. And you could tell, even just looking at the package, well, these guys are really all the same thing. Yeah. But whatever, the Bob Budiansky, who we name dropped a couple times, came up with different bios for these guys to make them unique in different ways, right? Yeah. Early on in the early days of Transformers, because the toys were a novelty enough, in order to give them some different flair, in addition to having different personalities, they all had different powers.
Oh, and different stickers.
Yes, and different stickers. But the powers were something that was all just like up here. It's something you could play with, while you're playing with them. The toy couldn't actually do the power.
Right, it was all in your mind.
Yeah, it was all in your mind.
The power was in you all along.
So, for example, let's go ahead and go through one by one. I'll go ahead and move across here. You can transform any one of these you want, Noelle, if you want.
Well, I'm a little nervous about this one because I saw the wing fall off when you set it down.
Well, before we get to that, let's talk about this too. These 3 are very good examples of what's known amongst the fans as parts formers. We've talked about this briefly before. A parts former is a transformer that, in order to transform it, parts have to either be added or taken away in order to achieve the transformation.
So it must be hard to have them.
The original Optimus Prime was like that. His fists were a separate piece that had to be plugged into his arms when he was made in their robot form. Okay.
Okay, so he's not.
Yes, so he's made to come apart and be reassembled. Yeah. Okay. So, like, for example, the guns will need to come off because they'll need to go on the wings ultimately. The wings are easier to transform if you take them off.
I'm taking your word for it.
And these little wings that are by his feet also are, in my opinion, easier to transform if you leave them on. It's possible to leave them on. Yeah. But,
oh, boy.
So Thundercracker, the first one he transformed. Yeah. Thundercracker and Skywarp were warriors. That was their designation on their card. I'll have that on the screen. They're warriors. You guys were just, they were fighters. They were grunts, right? In modern times, Thundercracker's gotten a lot of characterization done on him, especially in the ADW comics back from the 2010s and on. He's kind of a reluctant Decepticon. Oh. He doesn't necessarily fully buy into the Decepticon philosophy. He's just kind of well, I might as well do this, I guess.
This might as well.
And so eventually he kind of abandons the Decepticons. He doesn't go full Autobot necessarily, depending on which universe you're talking about. But he definitely doesn't stick around and always be a loyal soldier. In the cartoon, the 80s cartoon, very much. He was just a grunt like that. He had kind of a gruff voice and. You just gotta do whatever. Oh, you need to take the fists off too. I neglected to mention the fists.
Well, I'm not getting very.
The fists are the biggest part. The biggest thing you have to take off because the fists don't go anywhere when you're done with them. So when you have the fists off, they just have to be set aside. You can't do it.
So this feels like that should go inside like that.
Yeah. So this one here, you've got to. This is the trick here. You got to be able to kind of pop the head through.
I thought so, but I felt like I was going to break it because I was pushing it real hard.
And then it snaps into place.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's like that.
Then the arms will fold
back.
The
arms go in. Okay.
So Thundercracker's a warrior, reluctant Decepticon in some continuities. But he was always present in that first couple seasons because, anytime the Jets were in the sky, Thundercracker was there.
The wheels down.
Yep. His special power ties into his name. He could generate sonic booms. That would be destructive,
Feels like there should be another wheel up here somewhere.
Yeah, it's in his cockpit, and it's another piece that comes off. So you open the cockpit, it'll plug in there.
Oh.
I always put the wheel, the wheel assembly
there it is.
in the cockpit because, as you saw when Noel's picking it up, it's kind of off weight. And putting that little bit of weight in the cockpit allows it to stay down a little better. So like here the Skywarp here, you can see if you look at this here, he kind of keeps flipping up. He doesn't have. I'm missing his wheels. I'm missing his front landing gear.
Yeah,
so
I imagine
without that weight, this doesn't hold that down very well.
Yeah. Is that going on the right side?
No. Okay. It goes in the same holes he took him out of to begin with. He's got flipping.
Oh my gosh, there's so much to do.
Yeah.
Even with all the parts that came off. Yeah. Okay.
So Thundercracker's the blue one.
Okay.
There was another bluish purple one that didn't get a name for the longest time. When we talked about Reflector a few episodes ago, there would be hundreds of reflectors sometimes, depending on if they just needed extra Decepticons to do stuff. There were lots of other generic purpley blue Seeker Jets that didn't have a name. When they went to Cybertron in one episode, there were some other ones. There was a green one and a yellow one. Those have gotten toys recently too.
Oh, what are their names?
The yellow one is the Sunstorm.
Chachi. Okay.
It's not Chachi. It's never Chachi.
Someday it's
never
gonna be.
Chachi.
Okay. Sunstorm.
Sunstorm was Acid Storm was a green one. So you've got them now. Basically, that's right. Now, I think on mine, if you look here, the wings are slightly different colors. I think I actually got the wing as a separate piece from my Thundercracker.
And this one is more damaged. Turn that around and show them that wing is more damaged. Yeah. So that one's obviously had some. It's been well loved.
These are definitely vintage. And so, like I said, here I'm gonna flip this down, just snap it in place a little more there too. But yeah, I think that's one reason why the wing keeps popping off.
But then and then you said these fists don't go in anything, so you just got to remember where you put them when you're a little kid. That just sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Most modern Transformers, they do their absolute best, I think, to have everything be integrated. Maybe the weapon is the exception, right? Yeah. But these guys, the wings come off.
I know. It's almost like what's the
point? The rear wings come off.
Yeah.
The fists come off, so and the landing gear comes off. So you really just have this core.
Yeah.
The fuselage there. But, that was...
Well, now that I've done one, can I do another one?
Yeah.
Where you talk about them?
Talk about next. You want to do Skywarp next?
Yes, let's do Skywarp.
Skywarp was my first Decepticon jet.
Okay.
My first Decepticon, my first Transformer ever was Soundwave.
His first jet.
So I got that at Target. And it was an open box. It was an open box, right?
Okay.
So someone had opened the box and played with it. And I didn't pay that much attention to it being a kid. I just I'll get this. I think I got a couple bucks knocked off it at the counter even. Oh. When I got home, it was missing a wing. A whole wing.
Oh, no. You poor thing. You must be sad.
This is the 80s, right? I couldn't get online.
Right.
I had to look up customer service thing. I think it was on the back of the box. I'm like, questions, call customer service. So I wrote a letter to Hasbro saying, hey, I bought this Skywarp, but it was missing its right wing. And I didn't realize that when I said right wing, it wasn't as descriptive as they needed. I guess that when I said right wing, I got the same wing, right? So for years, my Skywarp, I just had one wing. I just flipped it upside down, and put it on there. And he had a wonky wing as a result of that. Finally, I got the actual wing for him, and kind of fixed him again. But yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Skywarp.
So my Skywarp was not fully integrated there. Now Skywarp is the black jet. His special power ties into his name again. He had the power to teleport limited distances. He couldn't just teleport anywhere, but he could teleport, maybe a few hundred yards or things like that. You got to get these snapped down every time. It'll help it. It'll help it lock in place.
Oh, okay.
That'll help everything kind of tighten up and stuff there.
Okay.
So Skywarp could teleport. He was kind of the dumb one of the three. So he was the one who was just the grunt, whatever you tell him to do, he's going to do it. Yeah, wasn't too bright, so he could only follow rules to the letter, things like that. But very, very cool. He was my favorite just because I like the black styling and the purple. Purple's very Decepticon color there. My missiles on this one are broken. They don't have the same tips that Thundercrackers do. But it still looks okay.
Yeah, he's kind of rough, man. He's rode hard and put away wet.
Yeah. So that's Skywarp. So
still cool though, buddy.
And then lastly, we got the Commander, the Air Commander. So again, Skywarp, Thundercracker were both warriors. The air commander, he was in charge of all the Decepticon Jets, I guess, was Starscream himself.
And there was no Autobot jets, right?
There were eventually.
Okay, but not
the first couple of years. No, yeah. The second year they introduced Powerglide. He was the first Autobot jet, and before that there was Jetstorm, Jetfire. Okay. We've done Jetfire on BeerFormers. Okay, the one turned into like the one from Robotech.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's when they first started giving Autobots some air power too. Okay. And then when you got the aerial bots, which we haven't done yet, the combiner team, that was
that'd be cool.
that kind of synergy there. But go ahead and do Starscream.
Okay. Optimus has fallen. That's my Starscream.
That's Megatron.
Sorry. Megatron has fallen.
Yeah. Starscream famous on the cartoon for having the same voice as Cobra Commander because they were voiced by the same guy, Chris Latta. God rest his soul. You know, and. He always thought he was should be in charge, but he was a coward, opportunist, full of himself at the same time. We don't know anybody like that nowadays.
He could be in Congress now.
Anytime anything at all would happen to Megatron, he would take that as opportunity for follow me now, I'm in charge.
Yeah.
And probably the most famous time was in Transformers the movie, the cartoon from '87. Where Megatron gets beat up pretty good fighting and killing Optimus Prime. Spoiler alert. And while they're traveling back to Cybertron, they're traveling in Astro Train. Astro Train's like, we got to shed some weight or I'm not going to make it. So Starscream's like, oh, sorry Megatron. This really hurts me to do this. And so he chucks it out the window and Megatron gets rebuilt, without going fully into that movie. But Megatron, when he gets built as Galvatron, he comes back and Starscream's having a full-blown coronation. He's getting a crown and everything. So a lot of Starscreams you buy nowadays will nod that. They'll have a crown accessory that you can put on him and stuff.
I think I messed this up.
They transform the exact same way every time.
I know.
Bring this up. Okay. That's the part you keep forgetting.
I have spatial awareness
problems. Spatial awareness problems. Now, Starscream's had a power, but it wasn't tied into his name unlike the other guys, right? You think Starscream, he had some sort of noise problem, power too.
That would be cool.
But his power was he had a special kind of laser he could use when he wanted to. Otherwise, he could shoot regular whatever out of his lasers. But when he needed to or wanted to, he could bust out what was called his null ray.
Null? How do you spell it?
N-U-L-L.
Okay.
So we would hit electronics with it, and it would wipe them out.
Oh, okay.
Like an EMP or something like that. Yeah. So he would use the null ray to take people out once in a while.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd love to have that on the highway sometimes when I'm driving to work. Yeah.
So Starscream, oddly enough, has kind of got the most American paint job. He's not red, white, and blue, but he's close enough to red, white, and blue.
I would have liked him because of those colors.
Yeah.
I've always liked... He looks like Optimus.
Now, Starscream was the only one I never had as a kid.
Oh,
I acquired him as an adult later on. That's why he's so nice. He was a reissue.
Yeah.
They put him out again.
I thought you were spoiled, though. No, I can't believe you didn't get that one.
I never had a Starscream. Thundercracker I acquired from a trade with a friend at one point back in the day. Skywarp, I told you how I bought that one. This one I got as an adult collector, probably in the early 90s or mid 90s, something like that. Maybe. I can't remember precisely where I got it, but But yeah, so Starscream would Megatron would stub his toe. Megatron would stub his toe! Follow me! And, the Decepticons would be like, okay, I guess, and then Megatron would revive and be like, take him out.
And then he'd have all kinds of excuses.
Yeah. And,
for forgiveness.
And why Megatron kept him around, I don't know. I guess his usefulness as an air commander outweighed his treachery. I always never understood that.
You keep your enemies closer.
I guess that's really all it was.
Yeah.
That's
my headcanon.
The great Chris Latta. So the character was voiced by the same guy, and so they had the exact same characterization. I mean, Cobra Commander in the G.I. Joe cartoon was also kind of craven.
Yeah,
he was.
We all knew Destro was really
in charge of Cobra.
In charge of everything. Yeah, the arms dealer.
So before we move on here, these guys, because of the nature of how they first came out, being essentially the exact same toy that's done in different colors, has meant that every single time one of these guys comes out, you can bet the other two are going to come out too.
Okay, that's cool.
So they put out a Starscream in one of the newer toy lines. Set your watch. Because eventually you're going to get Skywarp, Thundercracker, or both,
Which means 3 toys in my basement instead of one.
I'll probably put up a few pictures of some of the ones that come out over the years. But yeah, it's one of those things. You get one, you get the other. Because it's cheap for them to do that. That's why they do it. I mean, if they had to come up with a whole new mold for all three of these guys.
3 toys out of one mold, I can see.
Yeah, so it's cost effective. That's why they do it. So it's kind of sometimes as a collector or a fan, they're like, can they just do something original? And they do, but sometimes you gotta make a buck too, right?
They all had powers, okay?
Yeah,
that's original.
Yeah.
They all had their own powers.
Yeah.
And the power was
There's a scene in like the first episode of the cartoon where they're flying somewhere and Skywarp's like permission to teleport, and he kind of does this and fades out, and next thing you know he's like behind the Autobots and
see, that's pretty cool. Them down, Which power would you like to have? Would you like to have teleportation?
Teleportation.
A null
ray.
Or the other one was he could jump real far?
He can make like sonic booms. Like
sonic booms.
Destructive sonic booms.
Okay, that one's lame. Yeah. Let's
so
just
like fly over stuff.
Yeah.
And,
so you're
stuff
going...
would break though, so it was damaging. So it wasn't like he just was like boom and people were like, oh my god.
I know, I get it. Sonic booms are destructive, but in terms of like the most effective,
I think teleportation is useful. You just go where you need to be. It's very useful
as long as you have control of where you're going to appear.
Yeah, and it was always portrayed as kind of like line of sight, so you can see this place, so we can teleport there. So it wasn't like we got to sneak in that building. How are we gonna do it? Oh, I'll just teleport in. He never did that.
I would love it if like you think you're gonna get me, and pew, pew, somebody's chasing them, and like, all of a sudden they gotta fall out of the sky. That might be kind of.
Now I'm gonna mention these guys.
All of a sudden that jerk who just like cut me off suddenly can't drive. Yeah.
No Ray.
Yeah, no Ray. Sorry. Anyway.
No, I'll mention one thing here because people probably are thinking about it, especially if you didn't know. These came out in '84, and I think they were produced in '85 and maybe then '86 though. Excuse me, I've got the hiccups a little bit. They put out 3 other new Seekers, and they were still based in the same center chassis, so they all still basically had this body input, but they had all new wing accoutrement that went on them, right? Okay. And those were and because of this, let me show you this real quick too. I'm not going to transform the whole way. I'm going to transform kind of partially here, but Noel was fiddling with this. This is how their head is supposed to be. This is how they're portrayed in the comics and stuff. So they've got like these little vents on the other side of their head, right? And in the cartoons, if they can turn their head, this big cone thing on the back disappears somehow when they transform.
Transformers physics.
But I can only imagine somebody at Hasbro was like, "What can we do with this? Well, maybe this works so well, knowing these 3 are based on the same mold. How can we take this mold and do anything more with it?" And in addition to making like 3 new types of wings for them, it was Ramjet, Thrust, and Dirge were the 3 new guys. They were also considered Seekers too. They just did this. So they had cone heads on there. So we'll review those at some point too. And that's what they're called by the fans, the cone heads.
Okay.
So those 3 guys were these.
Did they come from France?
They did come from France.
Awesome.
So there were other Seekers as well. And then over the last few years, even more Seekers have been given names and toys and stuff to go along with it. But these were the original 3 Decepticon Jets, based on the classic F-15.
That's cool.
Everyone knows Starscream.
And they're kind of heavy. Yeah, well, so they still had a lot of die-cast metal. What about the ones in '86? Did they have die-cast metal? Yes, they still have the
die-cast metal too, because it was still the same basic body chassis. And stuff.
How about today? Are they still making those?
No, die-cast metal is really like essentially a bygone. Once in a while, maybe something will have some metal on it, and it'll be kind of a big deal. Like, ooh, it's actually got real die-cast metal on it, but it's super rare because it's expensive. Yeah. And plastic, which comes from oil, by the way. So if the price of oil is up, price of plastic is up. So tariffs work. And just how speculation and stuff goes too. So the price of plastic toys creeps up as time goes by because of inflation in general, but also as the price of oil goes up. So and metal is generally harder to even produce, because it's more durable. It's, you can't just injection mold it.
It takes a lot of energy.
Yeah. So I'm not sure exactly how the die cast process works. I know that's a mold system where you inject the liquid metal into it, but anyway, so yeah, awesome 3 great characters. Starscream is probably the most famous. I mean, most people, if talk about Transformers,
knew who Starscream was.
They're gonna know Optimus and Megatron and probably Starscream. Because he's just one of those characters that has endured and still endures this day.
And it's a great name, Starscream. Whoever came up with that name, brilliant.
He was portrayed as a scientist originally before he became a Decepticon warrior. He was friends with Jetfire, originally, and before Jetfire defected to the Autobots or whatever. So lots of awesome stories behind this. So that's the Seekers. At least some of them. There's a lot more of them, but there were only 6 Seekers in the original G1 line. And then, like in the early 2000s, they started like using the same mold to do like Sunstorm and some of the other guys. And then more modern toy lines, these guys have come out with whatever styling they use for those toy lines. But Starscream's almost been around in some form in every toy line for the most part. There's a few exceptions here and there. Starscream was in Beast Wars. He didn't get a toy, but he was in the cartoon. His Spark came to visit, and he had possessed Waspinator.
Really?
And he was going around and making Waspinator do things.
Was Waspinator trying to take over the leadership?
When Starscream was in him, he basically tried to throw Beast Wars Megatron, and then eventually they expelled his, they exorcised him somehow, got his spirit to go back to space. So Starscream by far probably the most famous of the Seekers and stuff. But yeah. So let's celebrate talking about these classic Decepticons with a
classic beverage, good old American bourbon.
Yes.
Okay, well, why don't you grab it for us?
Go ahead.
So, we're going to do a spirit tonight because we recently had to take a number of trips to help move our oldest child into an apartment for that child's senior year of college. And these trips are going to take us down to Atlanta. So it's a 9-hour drive there, 9-hour drive back. If we're lucky. And so one of the ways that we kind of reward ourselves on the way home is having some stops at some of the easily accessible distilleries in Kentucky and Tennessee. And so one of the cities we drive through every time is Chattanooga. And we've always seen the signs for Chattanooga whiskey. And so we stopped there this last time. And so we're going to tell you a little bit about Chattanooga whiskey.
Specifically, the straight rye malt.
So the one we're going to have tonight, the one that we brought home, is their straight. It's called their Chat Whiskey 99 Rye. But they're really fascinating. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the story of Chattanooga whiskey because it was kind of a hard-fought battle. One of the things we were wondering about is why does there seem to be a proliferation of distilleries recently? Well, for a long, long time, there was very little places that were allowed in Tennessee, according to...
Very tightly controlled.
It was very tightly controlled. There were, from the time that Prohibition had ended, before Prohibition, there was all kinds of distilling going on, and especially in Chattanooga. But then there was Prohibition, and when we came out of Prohibition, and they started kind of like, scaling back some of those laws, in the state of Tennessee, there were only 3 counties that you could distill in. And it was like that for years. And so I'll tell you a little bit about how the founders at Chattanooga Whiskey kind of fought against that. So it was founded in 2011 by Tim Pearson. He is a Chattanooga native. And it says here, his mission was to bring whiskey to the people. And he was inspired by Chattanooga's rich distilling history. And they challenged the laws of the state, and they won the right to distill whiskey in Chattanooga for the first time in 100 years.
What is Chattanooga most famous for, though?
Their choo-choo. Don't know why.
An old 20s song, the Chattanooga choo-choo.
But they have some old choo-choos on display, so we went and looked at those too, right across the street. So Chattanooga Whiskey, they have 2 distillery locations. One is their experimental distillery on Market Street. They say that serves as their hub of innovation and creativity. And they also have a riverfront distillery where they do a lot of their production. And that's where they say they do their signature whiskeys. They do what they call a high malt whiskey, which they say that it has like 4 distinct grains. Okay. That's kind of their recipe.
I remember them talking about that when we did the tasting.
Yeah.
So.
But so it was 100 years. They were finally able to help get some laws passed in Tennessee, and now there is distilling in, I think they said, roughly 40 counties. And Chattanooga falls in one of those. But
now, we didn't research this, but just kind of knowing what we know, especially about Tennessee and whatever, I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that the counties that were allowed to distill were the counties where like the big ones were, like
we don't
Jack
know.
Daniels.
Yeah, we don't know.
That. I don't know that for a fact, but I'm going to guess that's probably what it was.
But so ever since 2011, they've been making these award-winning bourbons, ryes, all kinds of different fun experimental whiskeys. They say they have the only experimental distillery in the United States. that's where their tasting room is. So you can't taste down at the riverfront. Yeah, but they do their experimental batches, and they have a beautiful tasting room. Right there on that main street, right there.
Cross street from the Chattanooga Choo Choo.
Yes. Yeah, from the Chattanooga Choo Choo. There's not food. It looks like they do have like lots of spaces for rentals.
Do they have some light bites available?
I don't remember that.
I thought I remember some people having.
I guess it's possible, or maybe you can just bring them in.
Maybe.
But I'm not seeing anything here.
They had an outside porch area that you could set while if you didn't want to sit at the bar, and after you're done with your tasting, I guess you could just get a glass or whatever, you know.
But the tasting was interesting. It was it was very, very crowded, so we paid our fee. They gave us a wristband, and we went to the back, and they sat this in front of us. And so we got 6 glasses, and so the bartender, but he was talking very quickly. He was going up around. He knew his stuff, but it was almost a little too fast for us to keep up with. So our notes aren't great.
Did we get to share?
We did share. I think. No, we did. I think we might have. Did we share? I think we did.
We took it.
We did.
We had our daughter with us who was newly of drinking age.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, she has an expired ID. That was one of the reasons why she was coming home to take care of that.
Yeah.
But in Tennessee law was you have to have a valid driver's license to buy. So
they did not serve her.
She had to bow out.
But they let her come inside with her bird, so that was nice. And the bird was a big center of attention.
Yes, it was.
It's a pigeon.
She's got a white pigeon.
Yeah.
A pigeon.
Anyway, we did share this because you were driving, and so we shared 6 whiskeys. So we kind of went around, and you got to pick what if you wanted to pour one of some of his pour. But there were 3 like standards, and then 3 like that he got to pick.
Age.
Yeah. So so we tried their their Chat Whiskey 91, their Cask 111. We took a sip of this rye, so we're going to taste it again to see if it's as good as we remember, because that was our favorite one. We also tried what they called their Bottled and Bond Spring 2021. They had a Founders 13-year-old, and then the one that was really awesome.
Oh yeah,
it was a triple Islay Scotch barrel aged bourbon.
So
it had so much
Noelle
flavor.
here loves the Islay, the heavy peated Scotch.
Yeah.
Not my favorite because it tastes too much like what I imagine the nurse's office in school smelled like. But
I don't get that.
But when she drinks the stuff that's got that heavy peat, she's like she's at home.
It tastes like I can smell the.
So this was a bourbon that had some of those like medicine-y notes from the peat stuff.
So we brought home. We decided we landed on the rye that we really enjoyed it.
I like ryes in general because they're peppery.
It says here it has notes of fruitcake, cola, spice, sage, and toasted rye. Full-bodied with a malty, sweet, and spicy finish. Let's see if I think I remember.
These bottles have some stuff that says mash bill was malted rye, yellow corn, caramel malted rye, and chocolate malted rye. It tells you how they fermented it, 7 days of fermenting. 55-gallon toasted and charred oak barrel was the cooperage. Filtration none. So the bottle occasionally captures barrel sediment. So sometimes there might be stuff in your bottle here. So there's all kinds of interesting stuff in the back of this here. Age greater than 3 years, because that's part of what makes it a bourbon, right?
Yeah, bourbon has to be aged at least.
And batch size, there was about 6 to 10 barrels of this that they made, apparently. So
they do offer tours too at the experimentals. Yeah. We did not take the tour, but we saw people taking the tour through the big window. So very friendly. And if you go to their website, they have all the different kinds of experimental whiskeys that they're doing right now. Lots of things to choose from. Probably something for your palate. So
we didn't spend a lot of time because we were not in a rush to get home, but we were traveling in such a way that we were going to get home at dark anyway. So it's kind of like, okay, let's get our tasting in.
Yeah.
And we had to get out. So we only spent like maybe a half an hour at the most, but it was still a fun experience.
It really was.
Yeah, so you'll see the pictures on the screen there. So you're ready to taste it now?
So let's see if it's as good as we remember. So I'm smelling that. It's just got that wonderful spicy aroma. I mean, I can smell. It's like cinnamony to me.
Just ryes have a bite that regular bourbons don't have.
Oh yeah, peppery on my lips.
Yep.
Oh yeah. You can taste. It's very wood forward. I can taste that cask in there, which I love. It's got
the good legs.
Yes. Oh yeah, the legs are excellent.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see that.
What color would this be? Honey.
Yeah, I would call that, but between hay and honey.
Yeah.
But yeah, very toffee. I get the
Good
toffee.
stuff.
I don't get a lot of cherry in this like I usually do with
Yeah.
bourbon, so maybe that's because it's a rye.
Because it's a rye. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Really good stuff, though. We will definitely go back as long as we keep having to go to Atlanta, and maybe we'll go back and spend a little more time.
Yeah.
We're not so rushed.
There was a brewery across the street too, so
Yeah.
if that's still there.
Yeah.
We're gonna check that out
They're
too.
downtown Chattanooga, next to the
Yeah.
Chattanooga Choo Choo train station. Little mini mall area. There was a
Yeah.
wedding going on. A lot of stuff going on downtown Chattanooga that day. So cool.
But it's as good as I remember. We chose well.
Mhm.
But thank you again for stopping by and
Chattanooga.
having a little side trip with me.
It's a cool bottle too, because it's actually got the made in Chattanooga molded
It's
into the
pretty
glass.
cool.
So that's
It's pretty
that's
cool.
a keeper.
It's totally worth it.
That's a
totally
keeper.
worth going down there. And their downtown area I thought was really quaint.
So thanks Chattanooga Whiskey for letting us
Thank you.
taste you, for allowing us to buy some of your whiskey.
Yeah, thank you for allowing us to buy some
They
whiskey.
did not give us anything, by the way.
Yeah.
So we're not being paid to endorse them. We're just telling you our thoughts about this fine whiskey. That
Yeah, it's really good.
But as we get ready to wind down, as we do, if you're interested in learning any,
Would you like a sip?
Megatron likes whiskey.
Sorry, there's no energy.
Megatron is drunk.
There's no energy.
Follow
on it.
Thanks, Starscream. But if there's any Transformer that we haven't covered you'd like to know about, drop us a line. We'll be happy to try to review that Transformer as soon as we can.
Yeah, and same thing. Any other spirits, distilleries, breweries, beers, anything of that nature that
The
you
adult
love,
beverage world.
yeah, that you think we can get to, we are happy to give it a whirl. We definitely, please drop us a line. I would love to have a recommendation in those comments. I'm always asking for it, and I haven't seen one yet. So if you have a recommendation,
I think people just know the
please.
Shivers will get there eventually.
I don't know, but this shiver is I promise you put it in there, we're going to make it happen. So unless it's like in Hawaii or Alaska, that might be a little hard. But we'll do our best.
If you'd like to know anything about the Transformer, go to tfwiki.net. The whiskey's getting to me.
I can tell.
It's smooth.
It really is.
tfwiki.net is a great place for information in general. I always name drop Chris McFeely. He's got a video on each of these guys and the Seekers in general. So if you're really into learning deep dives into more of the history and lore of the Transformers as opposed to what we're doing here in our channel, which is here they are and can we transform them?
And can well not break them.
You can well not break them. You can go check that out, Chris McFeely as well. But as we get ready to wind down here for our 38th episode, we want to thank you for watching. Make sure you hit all those buttons and tell your friends and share us. And so
Yeah, we're so close to 300. That would be so cool. Just a few more subscribers.
Yep. And yeah, we keep having the sips come out too with all the stuff I'm buying new. So if you like the sips, keep looking for those. I've got a backlog of toys again, so there might be sips coming out more frequently. But as we get ready to sign off, as we like to say here at BeerFormers, please play responsibly.
It's the ride.
Yeah, let's ride. Cheers.